Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into a stack of source material centered around, well, a really remarkable journey and quite a daring wager.
hmm Imagine a world where this incredibly strict, almost obsessive routine clashes head-on with breakneck speed, where fortunes, huge fortunes, hang on mere minutes.
And where crossing continents isn't just about booking a ticket, is it? It's about navigating things like unfinished railways, hostile landscapes, all sorts of unexpected dangers.
Exactly. That's the world that really jumps out from these excerpts from Around the World in 80 Days.pdf that you shared with us.
So our mission today is to unpack the most fascinating bits, those surprising challenges that kept throwing wrenches in the works, and the vivid details that really bring this race against the clock to life.
Yeah, looking at what this adventure tells us about the characters, but also about the world back then, late 19th century.
All right, let's dive into the source material. So right off the bat, the source introduces Mr. Phileas Fogg, this incredibly precise gentleman. His life in Savile Row is described as almost mechanical.
Oh, completely. And the source really hammers home how precise. It gives that amazing detail, doesn't it, about him firing his servant.
Because the shaving order was off by what, 2 degrees?
2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
84 instead of 86.
Yeah.
And that tells you everything, doesn't it? His whole world is just mathematical precision.
It really is. Fixed hours, same seat at the Reform Club, apparently no social life to speak of. Just this very solitary existence.
Funded by, as we learn, a pretty hefty sum deposited at Barings Bank.
Yeah.
So he's wealthy, but lives this incredibly constrained life.
And then into this perfectly ordered world steps Jean Passepartout.
Who is like the total opposite, right? His background is just wild.
Absolutely. The source lists him as a former singer, a circus writer, could vault like Leotard, apparently.
Wow, and a gymnast, even a sergeant fireman in Paris, he's done it all.
And the reason he wants the job with Fogg is specifically because he's looking for quiet, for stability after all these unpredictable masters he's had.
Yeah, and initially he's thrilled. He sees Fogg's routine, the spotless house, the synchronized electric clocks and speaking tubes, and he thinks, perfect, a machine. I don't mind serving a machine.
It's his dream job, ironically.
For about 5 minutes, maybe.
So you've got this fantastic contrast. The human-seeking, machine-like order meets the man who basically is a machine, and then the whole thing kicks off at the Reform Club?
Right. The conversation starts because of, well, how much faster travel's getting, steamships, railways connecting everything, the world shrinking, basically.
And Phileas Fogg just calmly states, based on his calculations, that you can now get around the world in 80 days.
Which sounds completely mad to everyone else there. But Fogg sees it as just arithmetic.
And it leads straight to this massive wager, 20,000 pounds.
Which the source says is his entire deposit at Barings. He's betting everything.
Against 5 other club members, Stewart, Fallentin, Sullivan, Flanagan, and Ralph.
And Fogg's reaction, just immediate action. Bet's made, okay, he says he's catching the train to Dover tonight.
No hesitation, no packing, seemingly. Just go.
Yeah. But even as they're about to leave, there's already this other element introduced. Detective Fix.
Ah, yes, the shadow. The source sets up this 55,000-pound bank robbery that just happened.
And Fix is described as having this kind of scent for criminals. He sees Fogg, this mysterious gentleman, leaving town suddenly right after the robbery.
And he jumps to conclusions, thinks Fogg must be the robber making a run for it.
Exactly. So he decides he's going to track him. Adds this whole layer of suspense that Fogg and Passepartout know absolutely nothing about.
So the clock is ticking, and they've got Fix on their tail, completely unaware. First stop, Suez,
Yeah.
and Fix is there.
Yep. Lying in wait, watching everyone come off the steamer.
And Passepartout, just being friendly and completely clueless, strikes up a conversation with him.
Yeah, this is where we get that great bit about his watch. Fix probably asks him the time, and Passepartout is adamant about keeping London time.
He refuses point blank to change it. So much the worse for the sun, monsieur, he says. The sun will be wrong, then. It's brilliant. Shows his stubborn loyalty to home.
It does. And it also shows something so normal.
Yeah.
He's worrying about the gas burner he left on back in Savile Row.
Yes. Calculating the cost 2 shillings and 6 pence a day, which he says is more than his wages.
It's such a human touch amidst this epic journey, isn't it? A tiny, mundane worry.
And he tells Fix he assumes the trip ends in Bombay. Still totally in the dark about the 80 days part.
So they reach India. The source gives us the scale, huge territory, massive population, British rule centered in Calcutta. Sets the scene.
They hop on a train, meets Sir Francis Cromarty, an army officer, but then, bang, the first major roadblock.
The railway line literally just stops. It's unfinished, somewhere near the Vindhyas Mountains.
So much for Fogg's perfect schedule. The source says passengers usually had to cross this gap using palanquins or ponies.
Which is way too slow for Fogg, obviously. He needs to get to Allahabad.
But Fogg's reaction is classic Fogg, isn't it? Completely calm. He says he'd constantly foreseen the likelihood of certain obstacles.
It shows his planning wasn't just about the schedule, but about contingencies too. He adapts instantly.
And the adaptation here is, well, needing an elephant.
He tries to hire one first, offers £10 an hour, then 20, then 40. Huge sums. But the owner refuses.
So Fogg just pivots. Okay, can't hire one, I'll buy one.
The owner thinks he's got Fogg over a barrel, asks for an astronomical price. But Fogg says, look, £20,000 are at stake. I'll pay a fabulous price.
And he does. £1,000 for Kiuni the elephant.
£1,000. Just like that. It's incredible. Shows the stakes in his absolute resolve. Kiuni's described as trained for war, but gentle, like sugar and butter, apparently.
Quite the character already.
So this elephant journey takes them through Bundelkund. And the source describes it as, well, pretty rough terrain. Savage landscape, dense forests, plains.
Yeah, and mentions the local Rajas still resisting full English control, encounters with ferocious Indians, monkeys fleeing. It paints a picture of a wild, somewhat untamed area.
And it gets darker. There's that mention of the fatal country, of the Thuggees, the sectaries of the goddess Kali.
Right, who strangled victims for their goddess. The source notes the British government was trying to stamp this out, which highlights that tension between colonial rule and local practices.
So as they're traveling on Kiuni, they hear sounds, music, voices.
Their Parsi guide knows immediately what it is a Brahmin procession and gets them hidden fast.
And from their hiding place, they witness this procession. And Sir Francis Cromarty identifies the ritual. It's a sati.
Fogg, ever direct, just asks, what is a sati?
And Sir Francis explains the horrifying reality. A widow being burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre.
He also explains the alternative was equally grim shaved head, starvation rations, treated like an outcast, basically left to die in misery.
The source mentions it was sometimes voluntary, but often coerced, and that the government tried to prevent it where they could, but Bundelkund was clearly less controlled.
And the victim in this case is a young Parsi woman, Aouda. She appears drugged, stupefied with hemp fumes.
Seeing her, the group, Fogg included, decides they have to intervene. They have to try and rescue her.
Their first attempt is pretty desperate, trying to break through the temple walls with pocket knives. They get heard, have to retreat.
Sir Francis and the guide think it's hopeless now. But Fogg isn't giving up. He says, the chance which now seems lost may present itself at the last moment. That patient resolve again.
And while they wait, Passepartout, who's hiding up a tree, has an idea. The soul says he thinks, what folly, at first, but then, why not?
Always the unconventional thinker, Passepartout.
Dawn arrives. The ceremony begins. Aouda seems to partly revive, then slumps again from the drugs. The crowd moves towards the pyre. Sir Francis sees Fogg has his knife ready.
But then, well, the source just tells us an hour later the elephant is carrying them rapidly away from the pagoda. Passepartout's plan worked, whatever it was. Aouda is safe, though still out of it from the hemp.
But Sir Francis gives a stark warning. Aouda can't stay in India. Even in British-controlled cities, the fanatics would find her.
She has to leave the country entirely for her own safety. So now, she's part of their journey. As she recovers, the source describes her beauty, hinting she's going to be more than just a rescued victim. Right, so with Aouda now traveling with them, they get back on the train after Benares, and we get these descriptions of the Indian landscape flashing by. The Ganges Valley, villages, jungles.
Elephants bathing, alligators, different religious symbols. It really paints a picture of this vast, diverse country.
And the source notes the impact of Anglicization, British influence changing things. Steamers carrying wildlife on the sacred Ganges, for instance.
They pass through cities like Ghazipur, famous for rosewater, Patna with its opium market.
And Mongir, which is described as looking more like an industrial English city, like Manchester or Birmingham, shows the varied impacts of British presence.
But then, just as they think they're back on track, they hit another snag in Calcutta, legal trouble this time.
They get arrested, hauled before a Judge Obadiah.
And the charge goes back to Bombay Passepartout entering that pagoda on Malabar Hill without taking his shoes off. Sacrilege.
Fogg admits it happened, but tries to justify it, mentioning the circumstances, the rescue.
But Passepartout makes some kind of outburst in court, and the judge isn't having it.
Nope. Sentence comes down. 15 days in jail and a 300-pound fine for Passepartout. And Fogg gets a week and 150 pounds being responsible for his servant.
A massive delay. And who's lurking in the courtroom, pleased as punch?
Detective Fix, of course. This is perfect for him. Gives more time for that arrest warrant to arrive from London.
Passepartout is devastated, thinking he's ruined Fogg. But Fogg, cool as ever, he just pays bail. 2,000 pounds, the source mentions elsewhere, a huge amount to avoid imprisonment.
Just writes it off and keeps going. Incredible composure.
So they finally get on a steamer heading towards Southeast Asia. They pass the Andaman Islands.
Noted for scenery and those valuable swallows' nests used in Chinese cuisine. Little details like that pepper the account.
Next stop, Singapore. Described as quite idyllic, like a park. Pleasant roads, tropical plants everywhere, palms, clove trees, nutmeg.
Monkeys and tigers are mentioned too, which sounds a bit less idyllic. Fix is still with them, shadowing.
Passepartout does a nice thing here. Buys mangoes for Oda, shows his kindness.
Then they reach Hong Kong. The source notes the strong British influence again, feeling similar to Calcutta or Bombay in that respect. Victoria Port is buzzing with international ships.
Passepartout makes an interesting observation about seeing elderly Chinese men wearing yellow, the imperial color, apparently a privilege only for those over 80.
But then the source takes a really dark turn, describing the opium smoking houses.
Yeah, this section is quite explicit. It details the huge scale of the opium trade driven by English merchants, 1.4 million pounds annually.
And it doesn't shy away from the devastating effects on the Chinese population. Addiction spreading, physical agonies, leading to death in just a few years for heavy users. It's pretty grim reading.
And somehow, Fix manages to get Passepartout into one of these dens. Passepartout learns about the scale of the trade from Fix, though he misunderstands some details, still caught up in Fix's manipulations.
Right, Fix is definitely using Passepartout's naivety here, drugging him slightly perhaps to cause another delay.
Okay, so the sources are a bit unclear on the exact how, but the result is Passepartout gets separated from Fogg and Oda. He finds himself stuck in Yokohama, Japan, alone, and broke.
Which must have been terrifying for him. He's observing Japanese life. Yeah. The shops, the tea houses serving sake, noticing they don't eat meat because cattle are sacred, finding odorless violets. But he's got no money.
So he has to sell his European clothes just to get by, ending up in old Japanese garments. He feels ridiculous, like he's in a costume.
But then his past comes to the rescue again. He spots a poster.
For the Honorable William Batulcar's acrobatic Japanese troupe. And crucially, they're heading to the United States.
Perfect. So he seeks out Batulcar, tries to get a job as a servant, no luck. But then he remembers his old skills.
His circus background. He pitches himself as a clown, showing off his singing, gymnastics, balancing tricks.
And he gets the job, based purely on his past experiences, the very things he was trying to leave behind. Life's funny, isn't it?
It really is. He joins this troupe, and the source describes their acts, including this unique long noses thing with performers using giant bamboo noses for acrobatics.
A fascinating glimpse into that kind of entertainment. So he crosses the Pacific with the circus.
And during the voyage, he's thinking about Fogg and Oda. He sees Oda's gratitude, but he still thinks Fogg is sort of heartless.
Probably because Fogg is so undemonstrative, right?
Yeah.
Never shows fear or emotion outwardly. Passepartout, meanwhile, is described as lost in perpetual reveries. The whole thing is clearly getting to him.
He even gets annoyed by the ship's engine when the screw lifts out of the water in rough seas. His mechanical sensibilities are offended.
So they land in America. San Francisco first. The source gives a quick impression, feels a bit like Europe, but Montgomery Street has this distinct look, lots of men in silk hats and black coats.
And the International Hotel gets a mention, especially that bar with the free food.
Oyster soup, dried beef, biscuits. You just pay for your drinks. Passepartout is quite taken with this very American custom. The source also mentions the service staff being Negroes of darkest hue.
But San Francisco isn't exactly peaceful. They walk right into some kind of political rally that turns into a brawl.
Yeah, opposing factions going at it with canes and sticks. Fogg, Oda, and Fix are caught in the middle.
And Fogg and Fix immediately try to shield Oda. We even see Fogg using his fist to defend himself against some big guy. The precise gentleman gets physical when needed.
Shows another side to him, doesn't it? Not just calculation.
Then it's onto the Union Pacific Railroad. The source really hypes this up as a symbol of progress.
A mighty instrument of progress and civilization, built incredibly fast, connecting places that barely existed yet.
Mentions the inauguration ceremony with a mock Indian battle, a newspaper printed on the train. It was a huge deal.
The route itself sounds challenging, crossing the Sierra Nevadas, winding tracks, cliffs, and the train is like a moving town. Newsagents, food sellers.
And those clever sleeping cars that transformed at night, quite ingenious.
Aboard the train, what's Fogg doing?
Playing whist, of course, with Aouda and Fix, actually. Fix is keeping close.
And Passepartout. He finds a lecture happening in another car.
Yes, given by a Mormon missionary, Elder William Hitch.
The source goes into quite a bit of detail here. Hitch defending Joseph Smith and predicting Brigham Young will be persecuted by the U.S. government.
It mentions the government taking control of Utah, imprisoning Young for polygamy, and the Mormons resisting verbally. Hitch is actively recruiting on the train.
He talks about the church's history, its settlements, even a story about Smith interpreting an ancient Egyptian papyrus. And polygamy is discussed.
The source notes the Mormon belief about it and describes the women Passepartout sees as looking neither well off nor happy.
And Passepartout's reaction is quite strong, isn't it?
Yeah.
He feels pity for the husband, sort of repelled by the whole idea, and thinks the women look at him strangely.
It's a real culture shock for him, highlighting the diversity and sometimes controversial aspects of American life encountered along the railway. Okay, pushing eastward, but the journey hits more major snags. First up, the bridge at Medicine Bow.
Right. A suspension bridge, and it's damaged. Broken wires. The signalman is clear. It won't hold the train's weight.
That means a 6-hour delay waiting for another train from Omaha. Crossing the river on foot isn't an option. Rapids long detour. Passengers are furious. Fog!
Still playing whist. Utterly focused.
Until the engineer comes up with this crazy idea. Cross the bridge at maximum speed. Momentum might carry them over.
80% chance of success, he reckons. Risky. But another passenger, Colonel Proctor, shouts full speed.
And they do it. The description is breathless, the train leaps, the bridge collapses right behind them into the river.
Incredible, pure luck, really, saving Fogg's schedule that time.
But the danger isn't over. Further on, near Evans Pass, the highest point, they get attacked.
By Sioux warriors. A sudden, violent attack on the train.
It only lasts about 10 minutes, but it's brutal. The conductor gets shot and says they're doomed if the train isn't stopped.
And the source suggests it's Fogg who realizes this and acts to stop the train, breaking off his whist game again for a life-or-death situation.
The aftermath sounds grim, bloody wheels, trails in the snow. The Sioux vanish. But then Fogg realizes
Passepartout is missing, captured during the attack.
And Aouda's reaction, her look at Fogg, seems crucial. He understands immediately.
And this is a huge turning point for Fogg's character, isn't it? He knows going after Passepartout will almost certainly cost him the wager. 20,000 pounds gone. Ruined.
But he doesn't hesitate. He says calmly he must find Passepartout, living or dead, declares it his duty.
He prioritizes his servant's life over the bet. It's a profound moment.
So Fogg, Fix, surprisingly joins him, and some soldiers from Fort Kearny head out. And they succeed. They rescue Passepartout and some other captives from the Sioux.
But now they're really behind schedule. Fix is losing hope, thinking the chase is over. But then, in the middle of a snowstorm, another bit of luck. Or perhaps ingenuity.
A sail sledge appears.
Fix actually recognizes the driver, someone who mentioned these things earlier. They're used when trains get snowed in on the plains, basically sledges with sails.
And they're fast. Fogg immediately sees the potential. He negotiates with the owner, Mudge, hires the sledge to get them to Omaha.
The wind is perfect, blowing strongly from the west. They set the sails and fly across the snow.
40 miles an hour, the source says, covering the 200 miles to Omaha.
Mudge thinks they can make it by 1 in the morning, just maybe in time to catch the eastbound train. It's a desperate gamble, but it's their only hope to get back on schedule after the rescue.
And they make it. Arrive in Omaha exactly at 1 a.m. by sail sledge. An incredible feat.
Fogg pays Mudge generously, of course. Then it's straight to the station, onto the Chicago and Rock Island line, heading east fast.
The source then kind of fast forwards through the Atlantic crossing. We pick them up, arriving in Liverpool.
It's 20 minutes before noon, 11:40 a.m. on December 21st.
Fogg checks his notebook, notes the date, Saturday, the 80th day. He calculates quickly they need to be at the Reform Club by 8:45 p.m. that evening.
That gives them 9 hours and 15 minutes. The train to London takes 6 hours. It looks just about possible, maybe.
But then disaster strikes again at the custom house. Detective Fix finally makes his move.
He steps forward, taps Fogg on the shoulder, and arrests him as the bank robber. just as Fogg is on the verge of success.
Fogg's reaction is, again, astonishingly calm. He's detained, locked up. He even notes the time of his arrest in his journal, 11:40 a.m., Saturday, 80th day.
He reflects on the irony. If he's innocent, he's ruined by missing the deadline. If he was guilty, he's caught anyway. He seems trapped.
We learn later he's released. The real bank robber was caught 3 days earlier. The warrant for Fogg was pointless. But crucially, the release happens before the 8:45 p.m. deadline.
But Fogg, presumably thinking too much time has passed getting released, just goes back to his house in Savile Row. He believes he's lost.
Passepartout is there, frantic with worry, blaming himself for all the earlier delays, especially the pagoda incident in Bombay. He now understands Fix was just mistaken, like everyone else.
While Fogg sits calmly at home, the scene shifts to the Reform Club. It's Saturday evening. The deadline is approaching.
Those 5 members, Stewart, Sullivan, Fallentin, Ralph, Flanagan, they're waiting.
Nervously.
They're tracking the time just as carefully as Fogg was. They know the last train from Liverpool got in hours ago at 7:23 p.m. The next isn't till after midnight.
By 8:20 p.m., Andrew Stewart declares it over. Fogg's lost. No sign of him, no news. His name wasn't even on the passenger list from the New York steamer they checked. It seems absolutely certain.
The tension is thick. The clock ticks towards 8:45 p.m. and then, just minutes before the deadline, Passepartout bursts back into Fogg's room at Savile Row. He's completely out of breath, distraught.
He blurts out something about the marriage plans for tomorrow being impossible. Fogg calmly says, "Tomorrow is Monday."
And Passepartout cries out, "No, Sunday." Then corrects himself again, "No, Saturday."
And suddenly, it hits them. The revelation. By traveling eastward, constantly moving towards the sun, they gain time. Little bits each day.
Adding up to exactly 24 hours, they cross the international date line without realizing its effect on their calendar.
They didn't arrive back on the 81st day, Sunday. They arrived on the 80th day, Saturday, the actual deadline day.
And they look at the clock, they have only 10 minutes left to get to the Reform Club. So after digging through all that, what does this deep dive really tell us?
Well, it paints this incredible picture of a journey just packed with challenges, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You've got the physical stuff like the unfinished railway, the collapsing bridge, the Sioux attack.
Then the cultural encounters, some fascinating, like Japan, others really dangerous, like the Sati incident, legal problems, natural obstacles.
And that constant threat from Detective Fix hanging over them, even though they don't know it for most of the trip.
And Phileas Fogg himself. His almost inhuman precision is tested constantly. He's forced again and again to ditch the rigid plan for these really out-there solutions.
Buying an elephant. Risking everything on that high-speed train crossing, the sail sledge, and maybe most importantly, stopping everything to rescue Aouda and then Passepartout.
Yeah, that's crucial. His humanity emerges through the cracks in his mechanical facade.
And poor Passepartout. He just wanted a quiet life.
And gets the exact opposite. Thrown into this global whirlwind, facing danger, experiencing wildly different cultures, even ending up as a circus clown just to keep going.
And Fix, the guy trying to stop Fogg, ends up inadvertently helping him. Suggesting the sledge, for instance, which was vital at the end.
The whole story builds to this point where Fogg seems absolutely ruined, arrested, deadline missed.
Only for victory to be snatched back because of, well, a calendar mistake. A direct result of circling the globe eastwards. It's such a clever twist tied directly to the journey itself.
It really highlights how, even in a world that was becoming more connected with technology, steamers, trains, telegraphs, it was still full of huge, unpredictable obstacles.
And that Fogg's rigid plan only worked because he was willing to bend it, to adapt, and ultimately to prioritize people, Aouda, Passepartout, over the schedule and the money.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, listening. In our own world today, which feels, so much more connected, maybe even smaller, are there still these kinds of unexpected datelines? Unforeseen consequences or hidden factors in our own plans, our own journeys, that could fundamentally change the outcome right at the last minute?